Hello everyone, I'm Jeff Costa. Welcome back to this episode of Evaluating Out-of-State Rental Properties. And this is the first of a two-part series I'm going to be doing on how to evaluate property managers. So if you're doing an out-of-state rental, by default, that usually means you're going to have a local property manager on site to help out with running your long-term rental. And one of the things that I think is super important is to interview property managers before hiring them. And I'm going to share a document in the show notes that has all of what you're going to see in this episode and the subsequent episode in terms of a list of questions. Now, these are very extensive questions highlighting a bunch of different areas that are important to understand about a property manager. And if you look at this and think, well, gosh, no property manager is going to answer all of these questions, I beg to differ. I've had 3 different property managers happily fill this information out. They're in the business of signing up new clients, and it really doesn't take long to answer some of these questions. If you do find a property manager that balks at the extensive amount of questions, just cherry pick the ones you think are important and consolidate it down. Right? But it's easier to have all these questions and then consolidate rather than not have them at all. So let's jump right in. So when you're evaluating a property manager, and ideally you should be evaluating at least 2 to 3 of them, the first thing you want to understand is their background. How long have they been in business? How do they see themselves? Right? How are they different from a local competitor? And it's also important to understand what type of properties or neighborhoods that they specialize in. Sometimes they will only do long-term. Sometimes it's a mix of STR, short-term rentals, and long-term. Sometimes they don't do specific neighborhoods or don't provide service, I should say, in specific neighborhoods. So it's something you want to ask because you're going to depend on that property manager and their knowledge of neighborhoods all along the way. I think it's also important to understand what relevant real estate experience the property manager had before they became a property manager, right? Were you an agent? Were you a wholesaler? That kind of thing. Understand where they came from, right? Another big important point to me is, do they own rental property of themselves, for themselves? If they own rental property, it makes me feel better because they understand the challenges of a landlord, right? So this is something I highly, highly look for. And, this is one of those questions that you can cherry pick out and definitely ask. I also want to know how many properties they're currently managing, really for a couple different reasons. Number one, I want to make sure that they're not overextended, right? That they have the staff and the ability to take me on and my properties on as a marginal addition to what they already have. I also don't want to see the other end of the spectrum, right? Where they're only managing a couple of properties. It usually means they're just getting started and really don't have a lot of experience, right? So you want to find some kind of middle ground there. You also want to understand if they are licensed. Now, this is not required everywhere, but it's also a thing that if it is required in the state you're purchasing in, you want them to be licensed. And you can go on and check online and check that. I also look for membership in NRAPM, the National Association of Residential Property Managers. Now, this is also not a requirement, but it kind of shows a dedication to the craft, right? That they care enough about what they're doing as a property manager to join a professional association and maintain that membership. So the next thing after background that I turn to is their systems and their processes. This is super important because businesses live and die by their processes. So the first thing I want to ask is, hey, do you work alone or do you have a team? And it's usually an important point that they have a team. No one person can do everything that a property manager does. like maintenance, evictions, rental collection. You want to understand that team, and if it's possible, how big that team actually is. So I usually ask, hey, can I see a copy of your org chart to understand who does what? And it will also help you understand where they have personnel, right? Do they have in-house contractors? Do they have dedicated rental agents? Do they have people who manage renovations and that kind of thing? So you want to kind of understand how they're structured. Another big point here is in bullet 4. What software do you use to manage your operations? In today's day and age, there is no excuse for a property manager not to have a software as a service implementation that they use. It could be RentReady, it could be something else. What you don't want to see is someone tell you, we don't have software. We use PayPal or Zelle for sending money or in either direction, right? And you really, there's no excuse for a property manager not to be able to afford the small monthly fee to use a software as a service portal. Not only to manage their tenant requests, but to manage disbursements and billing and so forth, right? And you really want to see two sides of this software. You want to see that the software that they're using provides you, as the landlord, a portal so you can go in and see service requests, you can see invoices, you can see your monthly statements, all of that. But it also should include a portal for the tenants to log in and enter a service request, for example, or pay the rent electronically. So again, if you're cherry picking questions, that's a big one to me. The next one, talk me through the full life cycle of a tenant. I also think this is a big one. You're asking the property manager to describe to you their entire end-to-end process, right? About how they bring a tenant on board, all the way from advertising to that tenant to onboarding them, getting the lease signed, renewing leases, and move out. This question alone could probably take you half an hour or on a call with a property manager if you dug into individual areas, right? But you also want to know what fees are associated with those stages, right? Are you going to be charged onboarding fees? We'll get into some of that later, right? I would not expect fees for advertising the vacancy of the apartment, for example. Another good question to ask is almost the inverse of that, right? What do you not cover as a property manager, right? This should get you a pretty interesting answer, right? And you're looking for, hey, I don't provide services to do renovations. I usually farm those out to XYZ. You're really looking for things that you want to make sure that you're not surprised at that your property manager doesn't cover. And they should have a pretty good list here, right? They should have answered this question for other potential customers. Another thing that's worth doing if you have the time is speaking to one of their customers as a reference, right? This is not something you have to do. If you have time, it's certainly time consuming to do this. But I would say, ask for it. And if you actually don't follow through and talk to the customer, then at a minimum, and check to see if they are comfortable giving you the reference, right? To me, it's a red flag if they say no to this question and don't want to provide a customer as a reference, right? They should always have one or two that you can talk to. And if they don't want you talking to them, that's a reason to raise a red flag. And then finally, I like to know, do they have dedicated contractors on staff? This usually means handyman, right? So that you have some sense of who can handle the more basic type of things that happen on your property, right? A handyman can do things like change a lock or caulk a tub, right? Where you don't have to bring in a specialist at higher rates to do that. So I think it's kind of important that they have at least one, possibly two dedicated contractors on staff. The more the merrier to get work done. And you're going to see that kind of also depends on the scale that they are operating at. The next section here, and this is where we'll close on this session, is communication. A huge one, right? You always hear the statement, well, real estate is really hands-off, right? It's passive investing. Not true. There's always the statement that follows immediately after that, that you have to manage the manager. And that is very, very true. As an owner, you want to manage that relationship with your PM, which often means you're doing a lot of extra work to make sure things are happening, right? My own experience has proven that you can get answers from your property manager, but they are often very busy. So you have to chase down answers if you're not immediately getting them. So the first question I ask is, who's my primary contact, right? And that answer is probably going to break into, you have a primary contact for different things, right? If you want to have some work done, it might be one contact. If you've got a billing question, it's another. And if you have a question that is more generalized, it's probably someone else. If you want to ask about, where's my property been listed? Show me the links. But you want to know at least who you should be contacting and who their name and what their preferred method of contact is. Usually that's email. And then the next question I ask is, hey, what do you expect from me as an owner? Right? Kind of an open-ended question, but it's a good one to ask to understand, hey, we expect you to do X, Y, and Z, right? Review invoices, pay bills on time, whatever that is. But it's a good question to ask. Another one, how often will you send me updates about my property, right? And this goes to the heart of what they do, right? Are they on your property checking it out? At what schedule are they doing that, right? How often are they coming on to cut the grass? You want to understand how often they're actually going to be there. And I wouldn't expect much here, right? Property managers usually have a set of properties and they have to spread their time among those properties. But it's also something that you should expect that on some kind of regular basis, perhaps every quarter, every 6 months, at least once a year, they're walking your property, right? They're going in, they're checking on tenants, they're checking on the condition of the property, and so forth. Another thing on the communication vein is, tell me how and when you would communicate various problems with me. If I have a AC unit fail, do I get an email? Is it something that you would send a text to me about because it's more urgent? If there's water coming in, do I get that as a text or do I get a phone call? Right? You want to understand and set expectations of how communication would happen for various problems that happen on your property. A corollary to that is like, hey, how fast can I expect you to respond, right? And you have to give some latitude here, right? It's my rule of thumb that you get 24 to 48 hours to come back to an email that I send, right? Unless it's an emergency where you want them to be responsive. I often like to ask, like, hey, how do you prefer to be contacted? Email, text, phone call, and usually you'll find D, all of the above, being said by a property manager, like use texting for something urgent, phone calls above that, email for regular communication. And then I would also ask, do you have a policy on landlords directly contacting the tenants? Right? Generally speaking, I don't want to contact the tenants. I want to be at arm's length, right? But there's some times where you're on site with the property, you meet the tenant, right? And I would not recommend getting their email or anything like that. But tenants can find you, right? And I usually let the property manager do what you're paying them to do and let them moderate those communications, right? But just kind of, it's worthwhile asking. And then the next question is, how do you send out owner distributions? This kind of ties a little bit into the payment rather than the communication. But, I want to know, what my statement looks like for the month, right? How do you send that out? Hopefully it's in the portal that you're getting to, right? That you're getting access to, but I want to know what those distributions are and how they're sent out. Like, what's the schedule that I should expect to receive this information from you? All right, so we are going to stop there for this particular episode. We will pick up with the second half of this by talking about fee structure and payments to property managers and a few other things. So thank you for your attention and look for the next episode.